So I bought another dead pen on eBay. Let's open this up and take a look. Well, this is exactly what I ordered. $14.99 M&M's Kart Racing. Let's see what's in here. This is interesting packaging. And there's a sleeve with a pen inside. Yes, there it is. Okay, let's take a look. This is, let's see. So that's a 6 with 2 dots right in there somewhere. That means it's the second quarter of 1946. So this is a 3rd generation Parker Vacumatic. Let's see what size it is. But it is the same. Standard size Vacumatic with what used to be a blue diamond. That clip and end finial is very, very tarnished and old. The cap band isn't too bad. There's some what looks like brassing on there, but that might come off. And the clip is bent, so we'll have to deal with that. Feels like, well, I doubt that there's a sack in there. There's lots of teeth marks on that end of the blind cap. Let's take a look at the nib. So, doesn't look too bad. Let me take a look with my loop. The fine is slightly out of whack, but it's not bent at all. Parker USA section doesn't want to come off, of course. People don't like to get these things because they're all black, but guess what? That's gold and gold filled, so it will come up beautifully. All I have to do is straighten that clip a little bit, which should be fairly easy to do, and polish all this up. And of course all these teeth marks and things, I can get them out of there. So we'll take this 1946 Parker Vacumatic through the triage process. We'll take a look at what needs to be done, and then we'll walk through the restoration. Something to look forward to. Hello there, welcome to Inkquiring Minds. My name is Doug and I'm back with another Pen Resurrection Sunday. And the pen we have for you on the slab today is from 1946, and it's a Parker Vacumatic. Surprise, surprise. I went back into my stash of old pens that I'd been collecting, and this one I purchased back in July, and it's been sitting waiting for some attention, and it needs attention. So let's take a look at this pen, triage it, and find out what it needs to come back from the dead. So here's the pen. It's a black Vacumatic. It has a blue diamond gold clip, but you can't tell because it's almost black from age. It has a top finial, black plastic, which looks like it's in good shape. It has a gold cap band with chevrons that has some brassing on it right there and there. And the clip itself is bent, so we're gonna have to see whether we can get that clip off and straighten that up. Even if you can't get the clip off, there's ways of straightening that. And there's the imprint. It says George S. Parker, Parker Vacumatic, made in the USA, and there's a 6 and 2 dots. That's the second quarter of 1946. Here's the blind cap. Someone's been using this to teeth on, I think.
No, we don't gnaw on our kitty. Leave Minnie Mr. Bigglesworth alone.
As they write, they think, and they bite.
He bites. He's a biter.
We can get all that out of there, I'm sure. Let's unscrew the cap and take a look at the nib and section. The section seems to be in really good shape, and the nib isn't too bad at all. It's dull from years and years of sitting around and doing nothing, but it's not totally black like I've seen some of them. And it looks like a fairly healthy tip. And the feed and the nib are misaligned. It's a Parker Arrow. Parker USA is all we can see. Let's take the blind cap off, and we have a pump that works, and it feels springy, like it might actually have a Vacumatic diaphragm in there. I'd be surprised. It actually, when I dunked this in water and gave it a try to pump it, it pumped up some water. So I think that's a working diaphragm inside there. Of course, the barrel is translucent, but it's so full of old ink that you can't see anything. So we're going to put this in the ultrasonic bath for a while and get all the old crud off of it and out of it, hopefully. Pump a little water through it, and then we'll see whether we can get that section off so we can knock that feed and nib out of there and give it a polish. Whether this has a working diaphragm in it or not, I think I'll probably try to take that Vacumatic pump out just to inspect it to make sure it's okay. And if it's a little bit old, we'll replace it with a new one. And here are the pieces out of the bath. And first, let's see if we can get that section off. Get some gripper material on here and see if I can, yeah. You usually don't need heat. A little bit of water soaking, and that was just about 3 minutes in the ultrasonic bath of Pen Flush, which is 90% distilled water and 10% ammonia. And there the sections come right off. So I'm gonna pop that back in the bath and get the old ink out of that before I try to take the feed out. And I'm gonna get my little pen light camera and we're going to go inside this barrel and see whether that diaphragm is in good shape or not. And give it a push here and we'll see. So we're going to get out my vac extractor here from the inky nib and we're going to see whether we can get that vac out of there to inspect it further. So we'll put the collet on the mechanism and tighten it down and see whether we can give it a turn. No, add a little bit of heat to this and see whether that works. There we go. Just a little bit of heat. Yep, that's done it. Didn't take much. These aren't glued on, so you're not melting glue. It's just old ink and old crud. I'm going to put it back on with a couple of threads there. And then we use a rod to push the diaphragm the rest of the way out. Try not to damage it if it is in good shape. There we go. Now it's in pretty rough shape. Yeah, so it was intact, but look, I'd probably split that already, but that's pretty rough, pretty old. Amazing to see a diaphragm that old. So we'll pull that out of there. Yeah, it fell apart in my hands. So now what we need to do is get that pellet out of that ebonite cup without damaging the ebonite cup, and I do that with a Dremel tool with a very, very fine drill bit and break up that little plastic marble that's in there, pellet that's in there. Now I'm not actually going to do this over the camera, but this is the process. Very carefully at low speed, put that Dremel drill bit into that little pellet and break it up. That's how fine that little drill bit is. So I basically drilled a hole in it and then picked the little pellet out with my dental pick. And I'm just going to clean up that little aluminum shelf there of any extraneous diaphragm material. And then we'll put this back in the ultrasonic as well. There we go. Seems to be functioning very nicely. And we'll put that back in the bath and clean it out with a test tube brush. So here's the section, feed, and nib out of the bath. I'm just going to pull that breather tube out of there. And it looks to be in good shape. They were all amber like this, amber in color, celluloid. And now we can put the nib in Bill's block and tap it out and take a look at that nib. There we go. Clean up that ebonite feed and let's take a look at the nib. And it has a mark to get my loop out to see it. And the mark says 5 with no dots, which would mean the fourth quarter of 1945, and R. And I don't know what the R stands for. There's no marking on the feed, but that's a 14 karat gold nib. And it looks like it needs a little bit of alignment. I'll get that in some alignment first, and then we'll check it on the feed as well. Now I'm going to check it up against a white card and see whether I can see daylight through. It's fairly narrow. So I'm going to use a gapping tool just to spread those tines out a little bit more so I have a nice gap. So I'm seeing a little bit of daylight through there. And we'll put my parts here in a little container so I don't lose them like I've done before. Whoops, one more part. There we go. And we'll look at polishing up this nib. I'm going to put some metal polish on it first and then polish it with my Dremel tool. And there we go, all polished up like brand new. Isn't that beautiful? So next I'm going to polish up the visible part of that ebonite feed, and we'll polish up the ebonite section while we're here. There's no major scratches or nicks or anything out of that, so I'm just going to use some polish on that, and then we'll put the whole thing back together again and give it a dip test to check that nib to see how it writes. There, now I've polished up that feed as well, nice and shiny on the visible side, and this was in the bath, and I want to show you now that all the ink is out of there, and we'll turn off some lights here and I'll show you just how beautifully translucent that barrel is. Isn't that gorgeous? When these things are clean, they are beautiful. So I put the section back on the barrel so that I can polish it with some polishing compound, and we'll get that nice and polished up. And then we'll go at the barrel and the cap, some micro mesh, just a little bit of buffing with some rubbing compound, and then microfiber cloth. Squeaky clean. And you can see the results. Look at that. So now we're going to put the nib and feed back together again in the section, and put the pen back together again just temporarily so that I can dip test it. So I'm just going to put the section back on the body. We'll put the breather tube in later. Grab onto everything with some gripper material and give it a push back into the section. Unscrew it from the barrel again, put our breather tube back in, and then we're going to put the pump without the diaphragm back onto the pen. Actually, I'm going to grease those threads a little bit first just to make sure they slide okay. The reason I'm doing this is so that I can put that blind cap back on again. Easier to write with the blind cap in place. And we just have to tighten that down hand tight. The blind cap back on. And then now I can dip test that nib. I'm going to check it for alignment first. Now they put it with the feed, and it is slightly misaligned. You might be able to see it. Slightly misaligned right there. See if we can align it properly. And the nib and the feed are pretty much aligned, slightly off, but I'll be taking that out again. So let's do a dip test here. Dip it into some Serenity Blue, and this is a 1946 Parker Vacumatic, and I would say that this is an extra fine nib. Check the wetness. It's very dry. You remember that I was trying to spread those tines out a little bit more because it looked like it was going to be a dry writer. But it's actually fairly smooth. There's a good amount of feedback. So I might, once I get this writing a little wetter, I might smooth it out on some micro mesh to get that line a little bit smoother than it is. That's extremely fine, I would say. So there's not a lot to do to this nib, so I think I'll go ahead and polish up the barrel. And I've got the cap sitting with some Pensbury Manor PMPPP potion to try to get that clip off of there. And I'm going to let it sit for an hour or so. I was unsuccessful at getting that top finial jewel out, so I'm unable to remove the clip. So I'm going to mask off the cap and the cap band and try to polish up that clip as best I can, and then do the reverse and mask off the clip and then polish up the cap with some micro mesh. It's a longer process if you can't get the clip off, but there you go. I was able to straighten that clip somewhat. There's a bit of a wow there. It's not too bad now compared to what it was. Let's see how much gold brightness we can get out of this very, very tarnished clip. So there, covered it up with some low-tack masking tape, and I'll go at that with some metal polish and then with my buffing wheel. And there we go. It came up a lot better than I expected. Of course, that top finial needs to be polished, but I'll do that with the cap, and the cap band will need polishing as well. But I'm surprised at how well that came up, and I'll replace the blue enamel in that diamond at the very end. I'll take the masking off, and then we'll go at this cap with some micro mesh. And I'll use a little bit of naphtha Roncinol on the cap just to get the sticky residue of the painter's tape off of the surface of the pen, and then repainter's tape on top of that cap band. Okay, now that I've dealt with the cap, I want to put the Vacumatic pump back together again, put the blind cap on, and polish up that barrel. So I've got my pellet pusher from the Inky Nib, I've got my talc from Anderson pens, and I've got my Vacumatic pump, and I've got a new Vacumatic diaphragm, standard size. So we put the diaphragm on the pellet pusher, and I've cleaned up that collar right there of any extraneous diaphragm material, and we push this into the pellet cup and hope that it doesn't split. Actually, get a better grip. That celluloid rod is rather fragile, so I'm going to put it on the collet here. Gives me a little bit more grip on it, and we push the pellet in. And the nice thing about this pellet pusher is there's a groove right there that shows you where to trim this diaphragm off. So we just feel for that little groove right there. Take my X-Acto blade and I can cut it all the way around actually. There we go. Now we know it's the right length. Perfect. I'm going to put a little pure talc on that diaphragm so that it will slide on itself. Now, I may do this on camera, I may not do this on camera depending on how it goes, but we're going to fold this little cuff back on itself until it reaches that point right there. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And this time it worked like a charm. Did it? It doesn't look right. No, it wasn't right. Do it over again. There, that's what it's supposed to look like. Perfect. There you go, that's the way it's supposed to look. Now we're going to put a little silicone oil on just the end of that cuff so that it doesn't twist inside the barrel. There we go. And we're going to put a little bit of silicone oil on those threads as well to make it easier to turn inside the barrel. So we'll put our collet back on, get the barrel out, and we're going to just twist and turn and twist to get that cuff in there properly and start a few threads, and it should be turning inside that barrel as well and not twisting. So I'm just going to run it back and forth to lubricate those threads back and forth. Make sure it's not twisting in there. You can usually hear it when it twists. And so we put the clamp on the collet and just hand tight that pump. There, just hand tight. Now I got the barrel together. We can go at that barrel with some sandpaper. I'm going to need some coarse sandpaper. Probably have to really grind into that blind cap because of the gouges are so deep in there. Probably reshape that a little bit and try to keep it even. But then the rest will get 400 grit and then the rest of the micro mesh. So I got most of those, well, I think I got all of those teeth marks out of that blind cap. I went at it with some 400 grit on the deep spots, 400 grit regular sandpaper, and then I took my 400 grit flexible and put it in my nib block in the concave section. Did a lot of this to get those deep gouges out of there. So now I'll go at the rest of this with the 400 grit and then go up through the micro mesh and then some polishing compound. And there we are. The barrel is all polished up and ready to go. Of course, I'll clean out those threads, polishing compound, but what a difference. Look at that blind cap. Had teeth marks all over it. Now it's like new. So let's put our parts back together again. I'm going to add a little silicone grease to those threads now, because I don't expect to have to get that section out again, but we'll protect that from leakage. Run it back and forth a couple of times. Lubricate those threads. And that'll make it easy to get back into the pen again when you want to clean it out. So much easier to take the section off and syringe in some water than it is to pump over and over and over again. So all we need to do now is fill this puppy up. So before we fill it with ink, let's find out what it weighs with the blind cap. 10.16. Press tear and fill it up with some Watermans. And we'll put it back on the scale again, and we got 1.52. That's really good. as much as a large piston filler. Here's a Leonardo Momento Zero Grande piston filler. It takes 1.5 milliliters of ink. And look at the size difference between these two pens. I think that's amazing. So now that I've got some ink in the pen, let's give it a try. I've smoothed out that nib a little bit more with some micro mesh, widened the tines with my gapping tool, and given it 7 strokes to inky happiness as well. So let's see how it writes now. 1946 Parker Vacumatic, and it is indeed an extra fine nib. I'd say about 0.4 millimeters. I'll measure that to make sure. I've polished out some of the feedback, but there is a good deal of the feedback. And what I'm noticing is that this is, the architecture of this nib is it's slightly turned down. And I'm thinking that this is a Parker manifold nib. I've got a feeling that this is a nib that was designed to write through many carbon copies of paper, hence manifold nib. And accountants and clerks and so forth, and people that had to make copies of numbers and precise numbers, liked these non-flexible nibs. Now there is some flex in the nib, a little bit of bounce, but it is very sturdy indeed. And it's much wetter than it was previously. And I'll come back with my thoughts on this resurrection. So, what are my thoughts about this resurrection? This poor old Parker Vac has been waiting for resurrection in my vintage pen case since the summertime. I restored several flashier Vacumatics ahead of it, 2 golden pearl, an azure blue pearl, an emerald pearl, and a burgundy pearl. So this black and grimy Vacumatic took a back seat. But one of the most satisfying things about doing a pen resurrection like this is how easy it is to get an old fountain pen looking and working like brand new again. Especially the gold. This gold looked shabby, the clip looked even worse. But look at them now. Remember I thought there was brassing on that cap band? It was just tarnish. The nib is gleaming and the clip looks new with a new inlay of blue enamel, which I haven't let dry overnight yet. That's dried for about 3 or 4 hours now. We're going to let it dry overnight, and then I'm going to buff it down until it's just inside that diamond. I'll show a photo of that right here when I've done it in the future. The magic of editing. The pen takes 1.5 milliliters of ink, about the same as a large piston filler. Not bad for a relatively small pen. The nib is probably a replacement. It's from 1945, but the R indicates someone had the original nib replaced shortly after purchase. Perhaps that's why this nib is manifold. The slight curve at the end gives some solid firmness to the gold nib, and it writes a very fine line. I've opened it up significantly, so it's much wetter than it was. If you're interested in purchasing this beautiful fountain pen, I'm selling it for $130 US, and you can contact me at inkquiringminds@gmail.com with your name and address, and I'll give you instructions on how to pay using PayPal, and I'll give you a shipping quote. Members will see this video in advance, of course, so don't be surprised if the pen is already sold by the time you see this. And I also wanted to give you a preview of coming resurrections, as I've recently acquired a few more fountain pen corpses to resurrect. I won a couple of golden pearl Vacumatics. One has no nib, but I have several nibs that can be donors to make that pen come alive again. The second has a nib, but the pen is so black with old tarnish, ink, and grime, it's hard to tell it's even gold celluloid or even a gold nib. I can't wait to see this old tarnished, grimy pen come back to gleaming life again. And there you have it. And that just leaves it for me to say, thank you for watching. And that's all she wrote.
I made this.